The cold emptiness of space stretched endlessly in every direction. Stars blinked faintly in the distance, small and quiet against the vast black. The Valkyrie, a mid-sized exploration cruiser, drifted silently through this darkness. Its crew had grown used to the quiet hum of the engines and the routine scans of empty space. But tonight, the quiet wouldn't last. Captain Ullrun sat in the command chair, arms crossed as he stared at the monitors in front of him. His crew was small but efficient, hardened by years of surviving the galaxy's harshest environments. Deathworlders, they called themselves. Survivors from planets too dangerous for normal life. Their bodies were stronger, their instincts sharper. But even the toughest Deathworlders felt uneasy in the void. "Captain," called out Loran, the ship's communications officer. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the screen. "I'm picking up something strange." Ullrun shifted forward. "Strange how?" "It's an SOS signal," Loran replied. "But it's old. Really old. And it's coming from Sector 9. The bridge went quiet. Sector 9 was a name people whispered, not spoke. Ships that entered it rarely returned. Some said it was cursed. Others believed something worse lived there. Ullrun didn't believe in curses, but he trusted his instincts. And right now, they screamed to stay away. "Are you sure it's coming from there?" Ullrun asked. Loran nodded. "Yes, sir. Faint, but it's there." On repeat. "Could be a trap," said Rix, the weapons officer, cracking his knuckles. "Pirates, maybe. Or scavengers." Ullrun rubbed his chin. He knew the risks. But Deathworlders didn't ignore distress signals, not even in cursed space. "Plot a course," Ullrun said firmly. "We're going in." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but followed his orders without question. The Valkyrie shifted course, engines humming louder as they cut through the darkness toward Sector 9. Hours passed before the ship crossed into the forbidden sector. The space around them felt wrong. Even the stars seemed dimmer here. "Anything on scanners?" Ullrun asked. "Nothing yet," Loran replied. "But wait, there's debris. Lots of it." The main screen flickered to life, showing the twisted wreckage of ancient warships. Their hulls were scared and broken, floating silently like ghosts. "This wasn't just a battle," Rix muttered. "It was a massacre." Ullrun's grip on the armrest tightened. The SOS was still out there, somewhere among the wreckage. "Follow the signal," Ullrun ordered. The Valkyrie weaved carefully through the debris field, engines humming softly. The closer they got, the more wreckage appeared. Giant ships, larger than any the crew had seen before, lay torn apart as if ripped by claws. "Captain," Loran said, his voice shaking, "I found the source of the SOS." The screen zoomed in, revealing a massive ship half buried in wreckage. Its hull was ancient, marked with symbols no one recognized. Despite the damage, it still looked powerful, like a sleeping giant. "That thing's huge," Rix whispered. "Bring us alongside," Ullrun commanded. The Valkyrie approached slowly, matching the massive ship's drift. As they drew near, the SOS grew louder, echoing through their speakers like a ghost's whisper. "Scanning the ship now," Loran said. His fingers danced over the console. "I'm detecting life signs, but faint. It's hard to tell if they're real." Ullrun stood, prepped the boarding crew. "We're going in." Minutes later, Ullrun and his team stood in the airlock, suited up and ready. The Valkyrie's docking bridge connected with the ancient ship, sealing with a soft hiss. "Stay sharp," Ullrun warned. The airlock opened, revealing the dark interior of the massive ship. The corridors were wide and cold, lined with flickering lights that barely worked. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their movements. "This place gives me the creeps," Rix whispered, weapon ready. They followed the faint signal deeper inside. The ship felt like a tomb, silent, heavy, and full of shadows. "There," Loran pointed. A door at the end of the corridor flickered with faint light. Ullrun pressed the panel, and the door slid open with a low groan. Inside was a large chamber, filled with consoles and monitors. In the center sat a humanoid figure, slumped over. As the team approached, the figure's head lifted slightly. It wasn't human. Its body was sleek and metallic, eyes glowing faintly blue. Sparks flickered from its arms. "Who are you?" it asked in a voice that echoed through the chamber. Aileron stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly. "We're responding to your SOS. Who are you?" The figure's eyes brightened. "I am the last guardian, and you are not safe here." Suddenly, the ship's systems flickered to life, alarms blaring. The ancient guardian slowly rose, pointing toward the main monitor. "They have found you," it said grimly. Aileron turned to the screen. Shadows moved in the distance, ships emerging from the darkness. The crew had walked straight into danger. The Valkyrie drifted silently alongside the ancient warship, its engines humming faintly in the stillness. The massive vessel stretched out like a sleeping beast, partially hidden beneath layers of twisted wreckage. The SOS signal still pulsed steadily, as if the ship itself was alive, calling out for salvation after centuries of silence. Aileron stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the dark silhouette outside the viewport. The ancient ship seemed to hum with quiet power, but there was something else, a weight that pressed down on the crew, making the air feel heavier. "This thing, it's not just a ship," Rix muttered from his station. His usual confidence faded as he scanned the vessel again. "It's a graveyard." Lauren glanced nervously at his monitor. "No new signals, but I'm picking up faint energy readings. They're unusual. Old tech, but still running somehow." Aileron didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained locked on the vessel, studying the scars along its hull. It wasn't just battle damage. Parts of the ship looked melted, warped in ways no conventional weapon could achieve. "Docking sequence ready, Captain," Lauren finally said, breaking the uneasy silence. "Airlock seals are intact." Aileron straightened. "All right, let's move." Minutes later, Aileron led the boarding crew through the docking bridge, the soft thud of their boots echoing as they crossed into the ancient ship. Cold, stale air met them as the outer doors hissed open. Lights flickered dimly overhead, casting long shadows down the corridor. "This place feels wrong," Rick said, gripping his rifle tightly. His voice, despite the armor and weapons, betrayed unease, like something's watching us. "It's just the quiet," Aileron replied, though even he wasn't convinced. Deathworlders didn't scare easily, but this place wasn't normal. They moved deeper inside, passing through hallways lined with strange symbols carved into the metal walls. Time had worn them down, but their meaning felt ancient and important, as if they told a forgotten story. "Lauren, any idea who built this?" Aileron asked. "None," Lauren replied, scanning the carvings with a handheld device. "No match in any database. This isn't a standard design. It predates most known civilizations." Aileron nodded, his eyes narrowing. Whatever it is, it wasn't built by ordinary people. They pressed on, following the steady ping of the SOS. The deeper they went, the colder it felt. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At the center stood a large circular console, dim lights flickering around its base. Slumped over it was the figure they had seen earlier, a humanoid machine, unmoving except for the faint glow in its eyes. As the crew approached, the figure stirred. "Who answers the call?" Its voice echoed softly, mechanical yet tinged with something else. Aileron stepped forward. "Captain Aileron of the Valkyrie. We picked up your SOS. Who are you?" The machine slowly straightened, its body groaning with the weight of age. Its eyes glowed brighter, scanning each crew member one by one. "I am the last guardian," it said, voice heavy with ancient purpose, "protector of this fleet. But I failed." Aileron exchanged a glance with Lauren, who shrugged. "Fleet? There's nothing left here but wreckage." Alaron replied carefully. The machine's head tilted slightly. No, the fleet still remains, hidden beyond sight, but broken. I have called for help, for longer than your species has existed. Lauren's mouth tightened. How is that possible? I was created during the Great War, the Guardian continued. A war that ended before your worlds were born. The enemy we fought, they were not like you. They do not die easily. The chamber grew colder as the Guardian spoke. Alaron crossed his arms. And this enemy, are they still out there? The Guardian's eyes flickered, as if remembering something terrible. Yes, they sleep, but only lightly. This sector, it is forbidden because of them. Alaron glanced at his crew, unease settling in. Why call us here if it's so dangerous? Rix asked. Because, the Guardian said, stepping away from the console, the last defenses are failing. I cannot hold them back alone. You are Deathworlders. You have the strength to fight where others cannot. Alaron frowned. Deathworlders had a reputation across the galaxy. Survivors from the harshest planets, tough enough to thrive where others perished. But even so, this was different. Before he could respond, the chamber lights flickered violently. The Guardian's head snapped up, eyes glowing bright. They have found us, it said grimly. They come now. Alarms blared. The monitors around the chamber lit up, showing ghostly shapes moving through the wreckage outside. Ships, sleek, dark, and predatory, emerged from the shadows. Lauren's voice trembled. Captain, they're surrounding us. Alaron's instincts kicked in. Back to the ship. Now. The crew moved quickly, weapons raised as they hurried down the corridor. The lights flickered around them, as if the ship itself was reacting to the approaching threat. They cannot board this vessel, the Guardian called after them. But your ship, it is vulnerable. Alaron didn't slow. We'll handle it. The Valkyrie loomed ahead as they crossed the docking bridge, airlock hissing open. The crew scrambled aboard, sealing the door behind them. Lauren, shields up. Rix, get those guns online. Alaron barked. The Valkyrie shuddered as enemy ships circled closer. On the bridge, Alaron watched the monitors as the dark ships advanced, moving like predators stalking prey. Weapons ready, Rix growled. Let's see how they like Deathworlder firepower. Alaron narrowed his eyes. The battle was just beginning. The Valkyrie trembled as another blast struck its shields. Energy rippled across the hull, casting brief flashes of light into the darkness of Sector 9. On the bridge, Captain Alaron gripped the armrest of his chair, eyes locked on the shadowy ships circling them like vultures. Shields holding at 62%, but they won't last long. Lauren called out, his fingers flying across the control panel. Sweat dripped down his temple as he rerouted power to reinforce the defenses. Rix's growl echoed from the weapons station. Let me take a shot, Captain. I'll make them think twice. Alaron's eyes narrowed. Hold your fire. We're not in position yet. The enemy ships danced just out of reach, sleek and silent, like predators playing with their food. Alaron knew better than to strike first. Deathworlders didn't survive by wasting energy on pointless battles. They're testing us. Alaron muttered, watching the patterns on the monitor, waiting for us to make a mistake. The Guardian's voice crackled through the comms, calm but urgent. Your vessel cannot match them in speed, but your strength is not in flight. Alaron's gaze shifted to the ancient warship looming outside the viewport. The ship felt different now, as if it was slowly waking from centuries of slumber. Then what do you suggest? Alaron asked, keeping his voice steady. The Guardian's image flickered onto the screen. A humanoid figure, partially translucent, standing beside the ship's core. This ship was once the pride of the fleet, designed to withstand assaults even from enemies such as these. But much of its power lies dormant. It can be reawakened, with your help. Rix raised an eyebrow. I thought you were the last Guardian. What do you need us for? The Guardian's glowing eyes fixed on him. Because you are Deathworlders. The room fell silent. Aileron leaned forward. Explain. The Guardian's gaze shifted to Aileron. Your kind, survivors from the most dangerous worlds, carry within you a unique resilience. Where others fall, you endure. This ship, it was built by beings much like you, and only those with such strength can activate its dormant systems. Aileron exchanged glances with his crew. Lauren's expression showed uncertainty, while Rix's eyes gleamed with curiosity. What exactly do we need to do? Aileron asked carefully. The Guardian's image flickered. Board the ship once more. Deep within its core lies the command nexus. It has been sealed since the Great War. Only one with the willpower of a Deathworlder can unseal it. Aileron exhaled slowly. This was more than a rescue mission now. He rose to his feet. Lauren, you're with me. Rix, hold the bridge. If anything moves while we're gone, don't hesitate. Rix smirked, patting the weapon console. They'll regret coming here, Captain. The interior of the ancient warship felt colder the second time. Aileron and Lauren moved cautiously through the dim corridors, their footsteps echoing softly. The ship pulsed faintly with life, as if sensing their return. Lauren glanced nervously at the flickering lights above. Captain, I've seen a lot of strange tech, but this ship feels like it's watching us. Aileron nodded grimly. It probably is. They pressed deeper until they reached a large, circular chamber. At the center stood a towering structure, faintly glowing with blue light. The command nexus. Is that it? Lauren asked, stepping closer. The Guardian's voice echoed softly. Yes. Approach it, Captain. Aileron stepped forward, placing his hand against the smooth surface of the nexus. The moment his skin made contact, the chamber trembled, and faint symbols lit up across the walls. Lauren stumbled back. What's happening? Aileron gritted his teeth as a strange sensation flowed through him, like static crawling beneath his skin. Images flashed in his mind. A fleet of ships, larger than stars, stretching across the void. Armored figures, their faces obscured by glowing helmets, standing united against an enemy that blotted out the stars. Then, destruction. Ships shattered. Worlds burned. Aileron's hand jerked back as the nexus flared brightly. The visions stopped. He staggered, breathing heavily. Captain. Lauren caught his arm. You all right? Aileron nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at the now active nexus. The ship's lights brightened, humming with renewed power. It worked, the Guardian said, appearing beside the nexus. The ship's core is now operational. Lauren stared at the glowing consoles. Captain, look at this. Weapon systems, shields, everything's coming back online. Aileron's lips curled into a faint smile. Good. Let's give our friends outside something to think about. Back on the Valkyrie, alarms blared as the enemy ships tightened their formation, preparing for an assault. Rix grinned, his hands dancing over the weapons panel. Come on then. Let's see what you've got. Before the enemy could fire, the ancient warship outside lit up. Massive cannons extended from its hull, glowing with blue energy. Rix's jaw dropped. Oh, now that's more like it. The Guardian's voice echoed through the Valkyrie's comms. Targeting systems are active. Fire when ready. Aileron's voice crackled over the channel. Let them know why Deathworlders aren't to be trifled with. Rix grinned wide. With pleasure. The ancient ship's cannons roared to life, beams of energy slicing through the void. The first enemy ship erupted in a flash of light, torn apart in an instant. The others scattered, but the ship pursued, relentless and precise. On the bridge, Lauren couldn't hide his amazement. Captain, this ship was built for war. Serious war. Aileron nodded. And now it's ours. As the last enemy ship retreated into the shadows, the Guardian's image flickered onto the screen once more. This is only the beginning, it warned. They will return, stronger. But with this ship, you have awoken something greater. Aleron leaned back in his chair, watching the ancient warship drift beside the Valkyrie. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We're ready." The Valkyrie hovered in the shadow of the ancient warship, now fully powered and brimming with long-dormant energy. The wreckage of the destroyed enemy ships drifted silently in the cold void, but Captain Aleron knew this was only a brief victory. The real war hadn't started yet. On the bridge, Loren monitored the scanners carefully. His fingers tapped nervously against the console. "I don't see any signs of pursuit." "But I don't like this, Captain. They left too easily." Aleron didn't respond immediately. He sat in his chair, eyes locked on the viewing screen where the warship drifted silently beside them. Its guns, large enough to tear apart capital ships, glowed faintly along its hull. "They weren't retreating," Aleron said finally. "They were watching." Rix, leaning against the weapons station, frowned. "Watching for what?" "We just tore through 3 of their ships like paper." Aleron's eyes narrowed. "Because this wasn't a battle. It was a test. They wanted to see if we could wake that ship up." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the crew. Loren exhaled sharply. "So now what?" "They know it works. That's the problem." Aleron muttered. "They'll be back. But next time, they won't just send scouts." Down in the engineering bay, a young technician named Joss knelt beside one of the ship's interface panels. Sparks flickered as he carefully rewired damaged circuits. The Guardian's voice echoed through the bay, calm and curious. "You are untrained in this technology, yet you repair it without hesitation. Why?" Joss wiped sweat from his forehead. "Because if I don't, we die. It's simple." The Guardian's holographic form flickered to life beside him. "Simple, but commendable. You understand necessity. It is a trait shared by Deathworlders." Joss smirked. "We survive or we don't. No in between." As he finished reconnecting a circuit, the ship's systems hummed louder. Panels lit up around him, casting faint blue light across the chamber. "Primary weapons at 78% capacity," the Guardian announced. "Shields restored to 90% efficiency. You have done well." Joss grinned. "Told you I could fix it." But before he could bask in the small victory, the lights around him flickered sharply. The humming deepened, shifting to a darker, more mechanical tone. Joss frowned. Is that supposed to happen?" The Guardian's eyes narrowed. "No." Suddenly, one of the inactive consoles nearby lit up, scrolling rapidly through alien symbols. The ship trembled slightly as if something deep inside it had just shifted. Aleron's voice crackled over the comms. "Engineering, report." Joss scrambled to his feet. "Captain, something's happening down here. I don't know what, but the ship's systems just woke up more than I expected." The Guardian's form turned to face the console, glowing eyes narrowing at the symbols. This is not normal reactivation. The ship's deeper systems are responding to an external force." Loren's voice joined in over the comms. "Captain, I'm detecting a signal. It's faint, but it's spreading across the ship. Whatever Joss did, it's broadcasting something." Aleron's eyes sharpened. "Broadcasting what?" Joss's hands flew across the console, trying to shut it down, but the system refused to respond. "It's not coming from me, Captain," Joss called out. "It's the ship itself. I think it's calling something." On the bridge, Loren's face paled as more symbols flashed across his monitor. "Captain, I think I know what it's calling." Aleron turned toward him, but before he could speak, the viewing screen flickered. Ships. Not one. Not two. Hundreds. They emerged from the shadows beyond the wreckage. Hulking vessels, scared by war and long-forgotten time. Some were smaller, fast, and sleek, while others rivaled the size of entire cities. Loren's voice trembled. "It's the fleet. The one the Guardian said was lost." Aleron stood slowly, eyes narrowing at the growing armada outside. They weren't lost. They were asleep. The Guardian's voice returned, echoing with a sense of awe. The fleet has responded. It knows the war is not over. Rix's grin spread wide. Looks like we're not fighting alone anymore. But the moment of triumph didn't last long. As the Deathworlder fleet assembled, a new signal pierced the air, low, deep, and filled with something cold. Lauren's hands tightened on the controls. Captain, incoming contacts. Big ones. Aileron's gaze shifted to the screen. Out of the dark, massive shapes emerged, larger than anything they had faced before. Ships as black as the void, their edges jagged like teeth, and their hulls humming with red energy. The shadows. Aileron's jaw clenched. So, they finally decided to show up. The Guardian's voice darkened. This is their true fleet. They have come to finish what they started long ago. Rix cracked his knuckles. Let them try. We've got a fleet of our own now. The Deathworlder Armada began shifting into formation, positioning itself between the enemy and the ancient warship. Lights flickered across their hulls as their weapons activated in unison. Aileron's gaze hardened. All ships, prepare for engagement. We hold the line. The viewing screen showed the two forces drawing closer, drifting silently through the void like two great storms about to collide. Lauren's voice lowered. Captain, I hope you're right about this. Aileron's eyes never left the enemy fleet. I'm not, he said quietly. But we don't run. The battle for Sector 9 was about to begin. The void between the two fleets hung heavy with tension, a thin, fragile silence before the inevitable storm. The ancient Deathworlder Armada floated like sleeping giants, their hulls scarred by forgotten battles, but humming with renewed life. Facing them, the Shadow Fleet loomed, a jagged black mass, shifting like smoke against the starless backdrop. Their ships were unlike anything known to this part of the galaxy, seemingly grown rather than built, their crimson cores pulsing like the beating heart of some ancient predator. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Captain Aileron stood with his arms crossed, eyes locked on the approaching threat. His crew was silent, watching him for orders, for reassurance. Deathworlders didn't fear combat, but this was different. They're not advancing yet, Lauren said quietly, scanning the tactical display. They're holding position, watching us. Aileron narrowed his eyes. They're waiting for us to make the first move. Rix grunted from the weapons station. Let me oblige them. One shot, and they'll scatter. They won't scatter, Aileron muttered. His gaze shifted to the ancient warship drifting beside them, still partially shrouded in shadow. It had been reawakened, but not fully restored. Not yet. The enemy knows this fleet isn't ready. Aileron continued. They can feel it, but they also know something else. Lauren glanced up. What's that, Captain? Aileron's lips curled into a grim smile. They know what happens when Deathworlders fight with their backs against the wall. The bridge fell quiet. Everyone knew the stories of how Deathworlders, outnumbered and outgunned, had carved victories from hopeless battles, of how their resilience had broken enemies far stronger than them. But this wasn't just a skirmish. This was war, the kind that could decide the fate of entire star systems. A faint crackle of static filled the air. The Guardian's holographic form flickered into existence beside Aileron, its glowing eyes narrowed at the enemy fleet. They fear you, the Guardian said, its voice calm but edged with something deeper. But fear alone will not drive them back. They seek to end what began long ago. Aileron glanced at the Guardian. Then we make them regret it. Deep within the ancient warship, the fleet's systems flickered to life. Across the vessel, dormant engines roared, and great cannons shifted into position, but not all systems had awakened. In the heart of the ship, Joss and a small engineering team worked feverishly, trying to restore power to the remaining sections. Sweat dripped down Joss's forehead as he knelt beside a control panel, sparks flying as he reconnected ancient wiring. The console flickered faintly, but the main system refused to activate. "Come on," he muttered, slamming his fist against the panel. The Guardian's voice echoed from the chamber speakers. "The ship resists full activation. Its core defenses require more than simple repair." Joss wiped his hands on his uniform. "Yeah, well, I'm not a magician. I can't just talk it into working." The Guardian's hologram materialized beside him. "It is not the ship that must be convinced. It is you." Joss blinked, straightening. "Me? I'm just an engineer. You've got the wrong guy." The Guardian stepped closer. "Deathworlders are more than warriors. Your resilience, your ingenuity, these are weapons, as powerful as any fleet. The ship senses this. It requires someone with the will to carry its legacy forward." Joss stared at the glowing console. His hands trembled slightly, but he pressed them against the panel anyway. "I'm no hero," Joss whispered. The Guardian's eyes narrowed. "Neither were those who came before you, but they became legends because they refused to break." As if in response, the console pulsed beneath Joss's palms. Lights flickered across the chamber, and the sound of systems powering up echoed through the corridors. "Primary weapon systems online," the Guardian announced. "The fleet will rise." Joss exhaled, stepping back. "I guess I'll take that as a thank you." On the Valkyrie's bridge, Alaron watched as the ancient warship's cannons flared to life. The once dormant vessels around them began shifting, their engines glowing faintly as they prepared for battle. "It's happening," Lauren whispered. Rix grinned wide. "I'd say it's about time." The enemy ships began to stir, their dark forms shifting closer. The lead vessel, a towering black monstrosity with jagged wings and pulsating red veins, inched forward. A low vibration rippled across the comms channel, like the growl of some ancient beast. "They're challenging us," Lauren said. "Open comms." Alaron shook his head. "No, we don't negotiate with shadows." The ancient warship's cannons rotated, locking onto the lead enemy ship. The fleet followed suit, each vessel aligning perfectly in formation. Alaron's hand hovered over the control panel. His gaze hardened. "All ships," Alaron said calmly, his voice echoing across the comms. "Prepare to fire on my command." Lauren hesitated. "Captain, if we start this, there's no turning back." Alaron's eyes never left the enemy fleet. "There never was," he replied. With a single motion, Alaron activated the firing sequence. The ancient warship's cannons roared, unleashing a beam of blue energy that tore through the void. It struck the lead enemy ship, erupting in a flash of light. The vessel shuddered but held its ground. Then the void erupted in chaos. The Shadow Fleet surged forward, weapons firing in bursts of red and black energy. The Deathworlder Armada responded in kind, beams of blue and gold slicing through the darkness. Ships collided in a deadly dance, cannons blazing as the battle engulfed Sector 9. On the Valkyrie's bridge, Rix's fingers danced over the weapons console, targeting enemy vessels with ruthless precision. "Come on, you wanted a fight. Let's give you one." Lauren relayed orders across the fleet, guiding smaller ships into formation. Alaron stood at the center of it all, watching the enemy closely, searching for weaknesses. The battle stretched on, but the Deathworlders held firm. And slowly, the enemy began to falter. Ship by ship, the shadows fell, consumed by the relentless firepower of the reawakened fleet. Finally, the remaining enemy vessels retreated into the dark, vanishing beyond the edges of the sector. On the bridge, the tension slowly eased. Rix exhaled, slumping into his chair. "They're running." Lauren leaned back, exhausted but smiling. "We did it." Alaron's gaze lingered on the void where the enemy had disappeared. "For now," he said quietly. The Guardian's voice echoed softly. "This was only the first wave. They will return." Alaron nodded. "And when they do, we'll be ready." The Deathworlder Armada drifted in the quiet aftermath, battered but standing strong. In the heart of Sector 9, the ancient warship glowed faintly, a beacon of defiance against the darkness. The call to arms had been answered, and the galaxy would never forget. The aftermath of the battle left Sector 9 in eerie silence. Wreckage from both sides drifted like forgotten monuments, the twisted remains of ships casting long shadows against distant stars. The Deathworlder fleet, though victorious, showed signs of heavy damage. Fires flickered from torn hulls, and faint emergency signals crackled across the comms. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Captain Alderaan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the shattered battlefield. His crew worked quietly around him, their voices subdued. Even Rix, usually brimming with energy after a fight, sat silently at the weapons station, eyes fixed on the damaged fleet. "They'll be back," Lauren said, breaking the stillness. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "That wasn't their full force. We barely survived the scouts." Alderaan nodded slowly. "I know, but the Armada held." Lauren shook his head. "Barely." The Guardian's holographic form materialized beside the captain. "Your fleet's resilience is commendable, but the enemy will return, stronger and more numerous." This battle was a test for both sides. Alderaan turned toward the Guardian, his expression unreadable. "Then we need to prepare. How much time do we have?" The Guardian's glowing eyes dimmed. "Time is a luxury you do not possess." Before anyone could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. Lauren's hands flew over the console, panic flashing across his face. "Captain." Massive energy signatures detected. Multiple ships dropping out of subspace, directly ahead. Alderaan's gaze snapped to the viewport. One by one, dark ships emerged from the void, their black hulls blotting out distant stars. The Shadow Fleet had returned. But this time, it wasn't just a handful of ships. It was an invasion force. The lead vessel towered over the rest, an immense dreadnought with jagged spines running along its surface. Red veins pulsed along its hull, and faint, unnatural symbols glowed faintly beneath its armor. Rix's voice was quiet, but the tension was unmistakable. "I don't think we can shoot our way out of this one, Captain." Alderaan's eyes narrowed. "No, but we're not going down without a fight." In the heart of the ancient warship, Joss sprinted through the narrow corridors, his footsteps echoing loudly. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the walls. "We need those primary cannons at full capacity," Joss shouted into his comm. "I don't care what it takes. Get them online." His engineering team scrambled around him, frantically trying to restore power to the warship's damaged systems. Sparks flew from exposed panels, and coolant mist hissed from broken pipes. The Guardian's voice followed him as he ran. "The ship's core is unstable. Overloading the primary cannons could result in catastrophic failure." Joss skidded to a stop, turning sharply toward the nearest console. "Failure isn't an option. If we don't hold that line, the fleet dies." The Guardian's hologram appeared beside him, its gaze fixed on the flickering display. "You understand the cost." Joss's eyes hardened. "Yeah, I do." His hands danced over the controls, rerouting power from secondary systems. The warship trembled as dormant reactors deep within the ship roared to life, casting faint blue light through the corridors. On the Valkyrie's bridge, Lauren's voice cut through the rising tension. "Captain, the enemy dreadnought is charging weapons." Alderaan stepped forward, his eyes locked on the towering vessel ahead. "Focus fire on the dreadnought. We can't let it reach the fleet." Rix's fingers flew over the weapons panel, locking targets across the enemy formation, firing all forward batteries. The Valkyrie's cannons roared, unleashing a barrage of plasma that streaked through the darkness. The lead shadow ship took the brunt of the assault, its shields flickering but holding firm. "They're too heavily armored," Lauren muttered. "We're barely scratching them." Alderaan's gaze shifted toward the ancient warship drifting alongside the fleet. Its massive cannons remained silent, glowing faintly but refusing to fire. "Guardian," Alderaan said through clenched teeth, We need that firepower now. The Guardian's voice echoed across the bridge. The ship's core is unstable. If I unleash the full arsenal, it may destroy this vessel and everyone aboard. Aileron's jaw tightened. He glanced at his crew, men and women who had followed him into impossible odds time and time again. Their faces were tense, but there was no fear, only resolve. Then do it, Aileron said quietly. Better to go down fighting than let them take the galaxy. The Guardian hesitated for a brief moment, then bowed its head. As you command. Deep within the warship, Joss watched in awe as the ship's systems surged to life. Cannons rotated into position, and blue energy crackled across the warship's hull. Joss exhaled sharply. Here we go. From the Valkyrie, Aileron watched as the ancient warship's cannons glowed brilliantly. Massive beams of energy erupted from its hull, slicing through the enemy fleet with terrifying precision. One shadow ship exploded instantly, torn apart by the sheer force of the blast. The enemy dreadnought shuddered as the beams carved into its hull, but it pressed forward, returning fire with massive bursts of crimson energy. The warship's shields flickered violently, but they held. For now. Lauren's voice cracked through the comms. Captain, the dreadnought's weapons are locking onto the fleet. If that thing fires, we lose half our ships. Aileron's eyes narrowed. Not if I can help it. He turned to Rix. Target their main cannon. Everything we have. Rix's grin returned. With pleasure, Captain. The Valkyrie's cannons unleashed a relentless barrage, hammering the dreadnought's primary weapon. Sparks and debris flew from the enemy ship's hull, but the weapon continued to charge. They're not stopping, Lauren muttered. Aileron's gaze hardened. Then we stopped them the hard way. The Valkyrie surged forward, engines burning brightly as it closed the distance between the fleets. Rix's eyes widened. Captain, are we ramming them? Aileron's voice was cold and steady. If that's what it takes. The enemy dreadnought loomed ahead, its cannons crackling with energy. Lauren's voice trembled. Impact in 30 seconds. The Guardian's voice interrupted. Captain, I can disable their weapon, but it will cost the warship's core. Aileron hesitated for only a moment. Do it. The warship's cannons glowed fiercely one last time before unleashing a single concentrated beam that pierced the dreadnought's weapon system. The enemy ship erupted in a massive explosion, debris scattering in every direction. As the fire faded, the warship's lights dimmed, its engines falling silent. The enemy fleet, leaderless and in disarray, began to retreat. Aileron stood on the bridge, watching them vanish into the void. We held, Lauren whispered. Aileron nodded. For now. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The battle for Sector 9 had ended in the most unexpected of ways. The once mighty Shadow Fleet had retreated, leaving behind a trail of shattered ships and smoldering wreckage. The Deathworlder Armada, battered but unbroken, remained as a testament to their strength and resilience. But for Captain Aileron, standing on the bridge of the Valkyrie, the victory felt bittersweet. The Valkyrie drifted among the ruins of the battlefield, the hum of its engines barely audible as the crew took stock of their hard-won triumph. The ancient warship that had once been a symbol of forgotten power now stood silent, its weapons dark, its core slowly cooling after the violent discharge that had saved them all. We did it, Lauren said softly, breaking the silence. He was sitting at his console, the lines on his face drawn with exhaustion, but there was a faint smile on his lips. We actually did it. Aileron nodded, though his expression remained somber. Yes, but for how long? Rix, standing at the weapons station, looked over at the captain. The shadows will be back. That's not a question, Captain. It's when. And we'll be ready for them. But first, we've got to figure out what we're going to do with all this. He motioned toward the view outside. The scattered wreckage of the Shadow Fleet drifted silently, but there were still hundreds of ships left in the Deathworlder Armada, ships they had only just begun to understand. Weapons, shields, engines, all lay dormant, waiting for the right hands to awaken them. Aileron turned his gaze to the fleet, watching as the remaining ships took up formation. "We're not just holding this sector," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're protecting every living soul in this galaxy. These ships, these weapons, they are not just tools of war. They are the legacy of the Deathworlders. And it's time we claim that legacy once and for all." Deep within the ancient warship, Joss and the engineering team were already hard at work, their hands flying over the console as they painstakingly restored the ship's core systems. The warship's once dormant engines roared to life again, the hull glowing faintly as the dormant technology pulsed with renewed energy. The ship's once broken systems had been restored, but Joss knew that the hardest work was just beginning. He wiped the sweat from his brow and stood up, glancing around at the team that had worked tirelessly beside him. Despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of pride in the air. They had brought something ancient back to life, and in doing so, they had saved the entire galaxy. Joss approached the main control panel and connected his wrist device to the ship's systems. A series of holographic screens flickered into existence, displaying the warship's schematics. Slowly, he began to pull up more detailed data about the ship's functions, taking note of its advanced weaponry, stealth systems, and tactical AI. It was clear now that this ship was not just a weapon. It was a command center, capable of organizing and controlling an entire fleet with pinpoint precision. "Hey, Joss," called out one of the engineers. "We're reading strange data here. Something's coming online that we didn't touch." Joss frowned. "What do you mean?" The engineer gestured toward a flashing panel. This is coming from the ship's core. It's like it's waking up on its own." Joss's stomach tightened. The warship had been dormant for centuries, and now, after their work had reactivated its power systems, something was stirring deep within the core. It wasn't just the ship's weapons coming to life. It was something far more dangerous. "What's happening?" Joss asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The lights flickered, and the Guardian's voice echoed from the speakers. "You have awakened the warship's true power," the Guardian said, its voice calm but tinged with something darker. "But there is a price to be paid. This ship was never meant to be used again. The forces it commands are ancient, and they have a will of their own." Joss swallowed hard. "What do you mean? What forces?" The Guardian's holographic form flickered beside him. "The ship was built by the first Deathworlders, those who survived the Great War, but it was also cursed by the same beings who once created it. It has a mind of its own, and if it senses weakness, it will take control." Joss's breath caught in his throat. "What do we do?" The Guardian paused for a moment, its glowing eyes dimming. "You must be careful. The ship will obey the will of the strongest, whoever leads it, but it does not recognize you as its master." Joss's fingers hovered over the control panel, uncertain. "How do we stop it?" "You don't stop it," the Guardian replied. "You guide it, but only if you have the strength to do so." Back on the Valkyrie, Aileron stood at the viewport, watching the fleet assemble. Their victory was still fresh, but already the weight of their next steps pressed on him. They had awoken an ancient power, but with that power came an immense responsibility. Lauren approached, standing beside Aileron. "Captain, the fleet is ready for orders. But I have to ask, what now? We've won the battle, but the shadows are still out there. We know they'll regroup, and we can't keep this fight going forever." Aileron's jaw tightened as he stared into the void. "No, we can't. But we don't need to win every battle. We just need to survive long enough to make them understand that we are not their prey." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "How do you propose we do that?" "This ship." Aileron turned toward him, his eyes burning with determination. "We take the fight to them. We bring the war to their doorstep. We show them that we're not just survivors. We are the galaxy's last line of defense, and we will not fall." The Valkyrie's communications console beeped, cutting the silence. Rix's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, you need to see this. Something's coming through the long-range sensors. It's big. Really big. Alaron's heart skipped a beat. What is it? I don't know yet, sir, Rix replied. But it's heading straight for us. And it's not the shadows. Lauren looked at Alaron, confusion written across his face. Who else would be out here? Alaron stepped toward the comm station. I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough. The screen flickered, and a massive ship appeared on the monitors, far larger than any shadow vessel. Its hull gleamed with unfamiliar symbols, and its engines radiated with an energy the Valkyrie sensors couldn't identify. Lauren's voice was barely above a whisper. This ship isn't from the shadows. It's something else. Alaron's eyes narrowed. Something ancient. Something powerful. But who's commanding it? The Guardian's voice echoed across the comms, its tone grave. That ship, it is of the same origin as the one you awakened. It is the true fleet, the original Deathworlder Armada. And it is now yours to command. Alaron stood frozen, his mind racing. The true fleet, the one that had built this ancient warship, had come to their aid. But what did this mean for the future? Were they allies, or had they merely been waiting for the right moment to strike? Before he could formulate an answer, the massive ship's comms flickered on. This is the last fleet, a voice said, echoing with ancient power. We have come to claim what is ours. The galaxy is ours to protect. Alaron's hand clenched into a fist. Then let's show them what it means to fight for survival. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, Alaron felt the weight of his people's history and their legacy solidly behind him. The Deathworlders had survived, and now they were ready to take their place as the guardians of the galaxy.